Meanwhile, in Great Britain, Prime Minister Boris Johnson set to ban Huawei from Britain's 5G network, a landmark decision that is likely to anger Beijing but win praise from President Trump as the U.S. continues to grapple with China's rising economic and technological clout. Earlier today, we talked to Heritage Senior Fellow Nile Gardiner about the decision, what it means for the U.K., the U.S., and for China.
Well, I think we're seeing very significant developments taking place in London with the Prime Minister about to announce that Huawei will be phased out of the UK's 5G telecommunications market. And it's a very, very significant development because Huawei is China's largest telecommunications company. Huawei has been in place already in the UK telecommunications network for close to 2 decades. And with the UK signalling that Huawei is going to get the boot from one of the biggest telecommunications markets in Europe, I think the rest of Europe is likely to follow, including Germany. So this will be a huge strategic blow to China's biggest technology company. And I do think that, the tide has turned now in Europe against Huawei, and this is a big blow certainly to China's efforts to try and gain a bigger economic, political, and strategic foothold in Europe.
How likely is it that the rest of Europe would follow London's lead?
I think that it's very likely that we're going to see many other European countries following Britain's lead, especially the Germans, who are very closely following what's happening in the UK. There's a growing rebellion within the German Bundestag or Parliament against Huawei, and the German government, headed by Angela Merkel, has to make a decision soon with regard to whether or not to allow Huawei a big role in the development of 5G within Germany. And Germany is the largest telecommunications market inside Europe. And so if the Germans say no to Huawei, then I think it's really curtains in terms of the operations of China's largest high technology company within Europe.
But in reacting to this, China's ambassador to Great Britain is saying that the UK would, quote, bear the consequences. So what consequences could that mean for the UK?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of threatening language coming from Beijing, including from the Chinese ambassador to London, who is warning that China will turn into an adversary for the United Kingdom if the UK kicks out Huawei. So a lot of menacing talk coming from Beijing. I expect that part of this is sort of talk coming from Beijing, but also at the same time, we cannot underestimate though the danger that China could retaliate in terms of cyber attacks on the United Kingdom, for example. They could make it much more difficult for the UK to sign a trade agreement with China in the Brexit era. So there are a number of things that the Chinese could do. And certainly the Chinese Communist Party leadership are extremely unhappy over the developments in London. And so it's the usual sort of threatening, menacing talk coming from Beijing. Some of it's rhetoric, but some of it could be translated into real action by the Chinese. And I think that this is a further confirmation of the fact that China is not a partner or a potential friend for the West. China is an increasingly aggressive and dangerous adversary for the West. And it would be the height of folly to allow a company like Huawei to have a huge stake in the development of 5G networks across Europe, because Huawei, which to all intents and purposes is an extension of the Chinese state, would have a huge amount of leeway then to spy upon Western technology networks. It would certainly use any kind of 5G foothold to exert an increasing degree of strategic power within the West. And so this has to be stopped at all costs.
And finally, where does that leave the U.S. and in particular the Trump administration?
So the Trump administration has been very hard line against Huawei. And we recently saw the Commerce Department implement a series of new sanctions, which make it impossible for Huawei to use semiconductors that have American components in them. And this is a huge blow, actually, to Huawei's operations. And it's also a key factor in the decision-making for the British government over the future of Huawei in the U.K. And U.S. pressure certainly, I think, has played an important role in terms of this stunning U-turn by the British government on the Huawei front. U.S. pressure combined, of course, with a very significant parliamentary rebellion within the Conservative Party against Huawei, and you throw into the mix tremendous unhappiness across Europe with China's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. You have a perfect storm here, which has created the conditions, hostile conditions towards Huawei now on the European front.
More details at heritage.org. Nile Gardiner, a senior fellow here in Washington. Thank you for being with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.